Now we are recording. So I want to welcome you all here. As I said, I'm Pam Varrin, the Family Support Coordinator at Cotting. Pleased to welcome back Alex Nadworny Dunn, who will be here to talk with us tonight about a team to carry on. Alex is a financial advisor at Special Needs Planning and also brings the perspective of a sibling, of a brother that she is involved with who has special needs. So we also want to welcome Emily Troutman, who is here with Alex tonight as well, who will be representing the experience of a sibling being part of the team to carry on with her sibling. So I want to encourage everybody to feel free to ask questions along the way. You can put questions in the chat. I've put the link for the last presentation on housing in the chat if you want to check that out at some point. I'll also send out fresh links for this presentation as well as the others to all of the participants, and also put them in the Cotting Weekly Update so you can refer to them. You can share them with everybody. So this too is another important area of question and sometimes worry for parents. What's going to happen after I'm gone, which is something that we all decide we're not going to do, but we want to be able to plan for that anyway. And as parents, we think about who's going to be there and how can I make sure that there are folks to support and make community for my child with special needs when I'm no longer available. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Alex. It's great to see you again, and feel free to start it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Pam, and thank you, Cotting community. This is so wonderful to be able to share this topic, which is very close to my heart, also very close to Emily's heart. So I'm so excited. It's the first time we are doing a presentation together, hopefully first of many, because I do think it is helpful to hear from someone else in addition to the story that I've shared over these past several years. So like Pam mentioned, tonight we are going to be talking about creating a team to carry on. There's a couple different pieces to that. So there are kind of the formal items that need to be tended to kind of make those team to carry on a thing. And then also there's some of the different items like the people that can be a little bit more fluid and that may change over time, especially considering that a lot of the families that probably are on tonight's talk are a little bit younger, so likely going through transition, maybe have not yet done that. So I definitely recommend listening to the other two presentations, planning for two generations, as well as housing. I think that those two things, and then this is kind of the next item that you tend to, but definitely making sure that you get your estate plan done. This is equally as important, which I think Emily will be able to share with you guys all firsthand too. So I do have a presentation. Oh, Pam, if you could just enable it.
Sorry, I always forget this. I am doing it.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yep.
And then Emily, just whenever you want to talk, whatever, please stop me anytime. This is very informal. I think it's helpful to be able to just talk like we would be if we were in person. Hopefully that will be a thing at some point again. But I think we want to get out of tonight as much as we can. So you should be able to see my presentation now. This is again, creating a team to carry on. A big piece, kind of a tangible takeaway from tonight could be creating your letter of intent, which is what the LOI stands for. So it is something that parents can do, which doesn't cost any money, which can be very, very helpful for siblings or other professionals, individuals, friends that could be stepping into some role in the future. So like Pam mentioned, this is from Affinia Financial Group, Special Needs Financial Planning Team. We're located in Burlington, live in Waltham. Every single day that I drive home, I see a sign for Cotting School, so I think of you all. Wonderful community again. So this is our team, myself. Still haven't changed my name. It's a big struggle. I got married almost a year ago now, still having a hard time. This is Cindy and my father, John. So we all are family members that have, again, loved ones with special needs. So I have a 31-year-old brother who has Down syndrome. And looking at the timeline here, we're going to go through kind of those different planning pressure points, which we did talk a lot about in the last two presentations. So we won't spend too much time there, but I do think it's helpful just to have a quick refresher. Again, high level of the 5 factors of special needs planning. It is important to have an idea of what those 5 factors are, because when you do develop your team to carry on, each of them are somewhat touched upon. So we'll talk again a little bit briefly about that. And then understanding the basics. So the basics to us maybe aren't really the basics. So I apologize if it is a little bit confusing, but we try to kind of break it down as much as we can. And then a team to carry on. So that is really the guts of this presentation. We'll be giving different examples. And again, any questions, really want this to be conversational as much as possible. And then we'll go over the letter of intent, which really can be an extremely helpful tool. Just imagine all the information that you have in your mind about your child that maybe isn't written anywhere. Even if you were to go out for an hour or two, what would you want to share with someone? Just imagine that if it was longer than an hour or two, this is really a perfect place that can prompt you to write some things down. And then we'll leave some time for question and answers, but again, anytime it works. So since we are the financial people, we do talk about the resources and really for each family about striking the balance. And every single family, the balance is a little bit different because the individual's needs are different and the family's personal resources can vary as well. There are also ways that families can access some government benefits. So it really is important to know what is available out there for your son or daughter and how to access those and how they would then supplement the personal resources that you have. You want to make sure that you're protecting those government resources, because even if you have a very substantial amount of personal resources, sometimes those government programs will provide for something that you would not be able to provide for using your personal resources. Hopefully, eventually that won't be the case, but at this point, again, it is very helpful to access some government funds as well. So this is the planning timeline, starting from early intervention to age 3, when a person goes into the education system, has the entitlement of an education from age 3 to 22. Transition planning, age 14, which some of you may be going through now, maybe a little bit older than age 14, thinking, well, what is going to happen when my child turns age 22? What are they going to do all day? That's where probably a lot of you are spending your time these days, is identifying that, talking to maybe DDS or MRC, Mass Rehab Commission, to develop a plan, as well as talking to Cotting about what skills that they may need in order for them to graduate. Age 18 is another really big planning pressure point. That's when you may need to go for guardianship or alternatives to guardianship for your loved one with special needs. And that is a role that eventually will need to be replaced. So thinking about the process that you're going through as parent at the age of 18, that is likely something that someone else will need to do when something happens to you. And there are ways to be able to potentially make that process a little bit smoother, which we'll talk more about again in future slides. So age 22 is really when the rubber hits the road. That is when there is no longer the entitlement of education, such as the supports of Cotting. And it really does take a lot more on the family side to be able to develop a long-term plan. DDS, if you are eligible for those services, likely will be a partnership over your child's entire lifetime. Unfortunately, there are not enough resources for DDS to be able to provide for residential and probably the level of support that you may be used to through the school system. So being aware of that, advocating is a really big thing for more state benefits, and then probably working a way to develop what strategy needs to be in place to supplement what DDS is providing. And then for parents thinking about retirement, what is that going to look like for me? And do I need to be financially supporting my child? And how am I going to do that? All the way to your state distribution and your child's entire lifetime as well. So kind of, again, planning for 2 generations is what we call it. Your lifetime and your child's lifetime. So the 5 factors of special needs planning, we'll talk briefly about this and how it relates to creating a team to carry on, the thing that shouts out to me when I look at this is that big heart, right? Just like Pam said, we all want to be here forever, that nothing's going to ever happen to us, but emotionally, it's very, very hard to think about, to process, right? There's so many different stories that I heard that say, well, I'm going to live one day longer than my child, you know, and it's just, it gets at your heart. So really thinking about those emotions and what do you want to do today to plan for that. And sometimes you do have to remove some of those emotions, but I think that the emotions can be also the things that drive you to plan, to drive you to think about what you need to do next. So being aware of them, but also don't let them kind of paralyze you from doing some of the things that need to be done either. Recognize and be aware. Financial, so that is what it is, you know, the money piece of it. So what resources are needed to be able to provide a great life for your son or daughter? Again, what is the balance between those government resources and personal resources? And then determining how best to strategize your assets. So looking at, you know, for example, how are you maximizing your 401k? Are you getting all the employee benefits that you may need for you and for your child? So that is a lot of what we do on a regular basis, develop financial plans, review different items for families to make sure that they are positioning themselves for those multiple generations, because it is a little bit of a different type of plan. The time horizon is much, much longer than if you were just planning again for that one generation. The government resources, we'll talk briefly about that, both the non-entitlement programs and the entitlement programs. So that's federal and state, and how to identify those two and what can you potentially expect. Legal, that's a big piece of tonight's conversation. Those are those legal documents, including guardianship, estate planning documents. That's going to be the next slide we're going to talk a lot about, and what families need to do now to plan for the future. Family and support, that's the people, that's the siblings, that's if there's no siblings, that could be the neighbor, that could be Aunt Sally and, you know, down the road, or Aunt Sally in another state. It just is figuring out who is involved in your child's life and what are their skills and how can you best utilize those skills if they're able and willing, and complementing them potentially with professionals or maybe other friends and family, and kind of building again this team to carry on. And all of those things together is what we call special needs financial planning, but again, can be used in this context as well of developing a team to carry on. So we work with families just like you saw that entire timeline. Most families, as they get a little bit older, start to formalize this team a little bit more. But I think Emily will share with you her story and how at any age, you just never know. You really want to make sure that you start thinking about this and having conversations. So the legal factors, this is really important to choose the attorney that you work with wisely. There are a lot of attorneys in the state of Massachusetts. It's really important if you have a child with special needs that you work with someone that is very familiar with special needs law. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of different types of trusts. And if you don't draft the trust properly, then they may not be protected for government benefits, and they may have to be spent in a way that may not have been your intention, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So really important, just from a very high level, to work with an attorney that knows special needs law. A lot of special needs attorneys also know elder law, because it's really planning for Medicare, for benefits. So if you come across an attorney who advertises in the elder care world, they likely, again, know special needs. We have a questionnaire on our website on questions to ask an individual, just so that maybe you can kind of get a sense if they are familiar with special needs law. So kind of an example, there's a lot of different doctors out there, but you wouldn't go to a cardiologist if you were having an issue with your foot. So you really want to make sure that you go to the right type of attorney, just like you want to go to the right type of doctor. Another thing is that you really want to make sure those documents and key roles are current. We had a big change with this laws back in 2020 with the Secure Act, which did adjust a lot of the planning with retirement assets. So you want to make sure that if you have a lot of retirement funds, or any retirement funds for that matter, and you plan on leaving some to your son or daughter with special needs, you may want to reach out to the attorney that you worked with a few years ago to draft those documents to make sure that they are applicable to the new Secure Act. And then in addition to that, you want to make sure that you work with your financial advisor and your attorney. We recently had a situation where grandfather had wonderful intentions to leave funds to his grandchildren, but didn't talk to his attorney, and he ended up leaving the funds directly to the grandchild, which then forced what's called a first party trust, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But it looks like Michelle has a question.
Hi, I'm sorry. Could you just back up for a second? You were mentioning something, and I can't remember the name. I'm sorry. I was fiddling trying to find the raise my hand button because I wanted to know if that's New Hampshire or Massachusetts or both.
It's a federal change.
Federal. Okay. And
So
what was it
for any
called?
state, the Secure Act, SECURE.
Thank you.
Yep. So the basic estate planning documents that everyone should have is a will, healthcare proxy, and power of attorney. A healthcare proxy enables a person to be able to speak on your behalf if you have any medical emergencies, if you're not able to speak. And then power of attorney is a person that will be responsible for your financial matters. So really important. A lot of individuals come talk to us and, yep, my child, they turned age 18. The first thing we did was we got a healthcare proxy, we got a power of attorney, and the parents don't have them for themselves. So something that Cindy always says is put your face mask on first. You want to make sure that you're planning for yourself. If anything were to happen to you, we want to make sure that your children would not need to get guardianship on you, but instead you have this power of attorney and healthcare proxy, which could appoint someone else. The next thing is if you have a child with special needs, no matter what your age, you should have provisions for a special needs trust. When you do this planning in advance, it enables you to have what's called a third-party special needs trust. So it enables you to leave funds directly into the trust where your child is the beneficiary, but never went directly to them. And that enables the trust to be very flexible. So the trustee has full discretion to be able to make distributions for the beneficiary. And also it enables you to be able to name secondary beneficiaries as well. So you can name who the trustee is, you can name who the beneficiaries are, which we'll talk more about trustees, guardianship, guardians, what their role is in future slides. But be aware that the special needs trust, you do planning in advance, it's very advantageous because you have a lot of flexibility and can be able to name secondary beneficiaries. If you don't do planning before, there is a way to continue to have access to those government benefits. However, there's much more restriction on how the funds can be used. It's called a first party trust. The reason why it's called a first party is because, say, for example, you have 4 kids and you do not have any estate plan. Well, each one of your children, based on Mass estate laws, would receive 25% of your estate. That 25% would go into potentially a court ordered or a first party special needs trust. That person would automatically be eligible for benefits again. However, there are some restrictions on how that money can be used. So for example, in a third party trust, if all 4 kids want to go on vacation, no one's going to ask them, okay, you can take those funds and go on vacation for that money. You can pay for your great grandkids too if you want to, using that third party trust. However, with the first party, there are restrictions that it can only be used for that person's benefit. So maybe there's a roommate that they live with that, guess what, they're their best friends. And if they wanted to go on vacation, they really would want to make sure that they could go with them. And it would make their vacation that much better. Well, that roommate needed a little bit of money to be able to go. And from that third party trust, that money could be distributed to pay for that roommate. if there were enough funds to provide for that. Whereas the first party, that could not happen. So while you can have funds protected for government benefits purposes, there are restrictions if you don't do the planning today. And then in addition to that, when the person passes away, Medicaid is reimbursed. So really important for everyone to go meet with the estate planning attorney, get these documents drafted. And then in addition to that, there's something called a pooled trust. So what a pooled trust is a type of account. You can name it in your will or in your trust if you have one, to have your special needs child inherit funds and have this pooled trust be the trustee. A pooled trust is run by a nonprofit. They typically have social workers, and they also have someone that can write checks on behalf of the individual. So make the beneficiary distributions. We typically suggest, not large sums potentially go to the pooled trust, because you may want something a little bit more custom for your son or daughter. So for example, there is a social worker there, but what if your son or daughter doesn't get along with that social worker, or already has a social worker that they have a relationship with? They won't be able to be they want to be able to adjust to that. Instead, that's a social worker that they have. You could make distributions to pay for that social worker, but then you'd almost be paying 2 times. So I suggest looking into that option. It is an option that's available to you, but it doesn't fit everyone's needs. So sometimes being able to create your own trust, have your own trustee may be the best solution. Guardianship and Alternatives. So that is the person that is responsible for the person. The alternative would be a power of attorney, or there is another more new supported decision-making process that you can go through that does use the power of attorney document, but that you can name multiple people to help with a person's decision-making. Any questions on that? So understanding the government benefits, I'm going to talk about this really, really high level. Federal government programs typically kick in once your child turns age 18 because they're no longer viewed as a child. So those are things like SSI, Medicaid, because your assets are no longer deemed to them. I know we talked a lot about this in previous presentations, but just something to be aware of as they're approaching age 18, identifying all of those. We have a checklist on our website that you may want to look at. It's the housing checklist, which talks a lot about those benefits as well, and the non-entitlement. So those are things like the DDS, the MRC, different agencies that may have a really long relationship with your son or daughter, but the funds are limited. It's by appropriation. There's a budget each year the governor puts into place, and there's different line items for residential, for day programs, for transportation. So, excuse me, it would be helpful if you don't have a sense of what those line items are and how this works. The ARC of Massachusetts is a great resource, or Massachusetts Families Organizing for Change is another to kind of understand a little bit about that. So really, will there be enough money? That's a very common question that we receive. And every situation is, again, so unique because every person's needs are so unique, and what resources they have, what government benefits they're accessing, and how much money will it take for my child to have a good life. It really just, there's a situation where this person just loves Snickers, and every single month they want a Snickers bar, and that's what makes them so happy. And as we know, that doesn't cost all that much money. My brother, I always joke and say I could give him all the Coke in the world, or $1 million, and he just would love this Coca-Cola is his favorite thing. Again, doesn't cost much money, but being around us and having that can of Coke once in a while is really what he really wants. And so it really isn't about the money. It really is about building this team to carry on, building this life, having this vision that you have for your son or daughter. And we talked a little bit about where the money will come from, likely a combination of federal government benefits as well as personal resources. So this is a huge part. Communication really is key. So many of you maybe have heard my story, so I'm excited for Emily to share hers, because many years ago, I remember sitting around the Thanksgiving table before I started work with my dad saying, okay, well, what's going to happen? And of course, the response that maybe you've given to your children is, don't worry about it. It's all taken care of. Everything's all set, right? Well, what does that mean? And I'm a person, when I say maybe you're lucky not to have siblings, it's maybe me that you're lucky not to have. I just keep pushing. Okay, well, what does, I don't know what that means. Like, so me and my brother both raise our hand. Well, he's going to live with me. My other brother says, no, he's gonna live with me. And then so we're arguing, and then my dad's saying, over my dead body, is he living with either one of you? It's like, okay, well, maybe we should have a conversation. And that really is a big piece of all of this. Things will change over time, but being open with one another. And I think that being a sibling, it's such a different relationship than a parent, because it's all that I've ever known. My brother, my first memory of him, I remember being in a bubble in Children's Hospital. And I thought that was normal, right? Like, I didn't know anything different. These watermelon slices, it's like, whenever I go to the grocery store, I see them and I think of that time in my life, but that's all that I know. And it's a wonderful life. I wouldn't ask for anything different. It doesn't mean that every family is like that too. I know Down syndrome, I kind of joke and say that extra chromosome is just extra love, right? He loves to hug, but I know there's other mental health concerns, things like that, that also can cause friction in the family. So having the conversation and having a sibling say, you know what, I don't think that I could take on that responsibility is a gift as well, so that you can start to adjust. Let's think about what we should be doing, who we need to have in our family, you know, in this plan long term, and how are we going to transfer these roles and responsibilities. So again, a great way to kind of start this conversation, if you're thinking about this, is to create the letter of intent, and then maybe take it, go out, have a nice drink, or, you know, make a nice dinner at home and talk with your family about this. And maybe other people have other things to add. And it's a very informal, tangible way to talk about this topic. And consider having a family meeting, having some different, you know, sibling conversations. Sometimes there are the siblings too, they can talk as well, and kind of thinking about that. So I don't know, Emily, if you have any story that you want to share here about communication or non-communication or anything about it. I don't want to put you on the spot either, but I want to hear from you too.
Yeah, no worries. So hello, everyone. I am Emily Troutman. I'm working with Alex tonight, kind of just going over all of the different options that are out there for families and how important that estate planning is. So Alex, do you want me to tell my story or wait?
I don't know. I think communication is key. I think this is a great time, but
yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, this is definitely the healthiest way to do it, to go about it. You know, families should be engaged, communicating. These family meetings, I think, would be super valuable. I really wish that my family had done that, speaking from a sibling. And yeah, I think everything you just said is spot on.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And yeah, chime in whenever. You know, like she said, really communication, having that talk. And I know people often ask, well, when, at what time, at what age? And every single child is different with whether or not they have special needs. I think that every sibling likely thinks about it, but doesn't know the knowledge that a parent has, like estate plan. What is an estate plan? You know, what is these different government benefits? Like, what are these different things? And that's why I think it is very helpful for a parent to start completing this letter of intent, talking to the children. We also have the alphabet soup for siblings on ways that siblings can get involved, like DDS. Well, maybe you can attend the ISP meeting or for the IEP meeting, you know, so, and I don't think that it's putting any additional pressure on your siblings. And if you do, I think just asking, you know, maybe having someone else involved in conversation. Nobody knows your children better than you. Again, special needs, non-special needs. So I think it's helpful to kind of talk, right? So this is a perfect example of just, this is my husband, again, almost a year now. And I remember when I first met him, do the test, right? Do the sibling test, the making sure that everything's going to be okay. And, you know, he's going to be there for my brother too. So I remember he's the youngest of 7. And I remember saying to him, okay, well, one day my brother may live with us, even though it's over my dad's dead body, right? Maybe. I have this whole idea of this like 2-family thing. And he's like, oh yeah, well, you know, maybe one of my siblings will live with us too. And he just totally like, okay, I'm like, you're a keeper, you're good. So it is about, you know, building that team, having those conversations. And it's not necessary, you know, he likely will never live with us and but he has another person in his life, right? So it is all about those formal and informal roles. So who will fill the shoes? It likely will be a lot of people. It takes a village, as you know, just as the parent, and you have the biggest hat right now, but you'll likely have additional folks that will be stepping in. So who will those people be? We have a lot of folks that have been on CPACs or different, advisory boards for nonprofit groups that now are each other's healthcare proxy for both the moms. Well, we need someone for this role. Can you be that person? It's really nice to see these relationships, because who better understands what you're going through too than another parent potentially. Right. There are some sibling groups out there, but not as many as parent groups. Maybe one day there will be more. But maybe meeting some people in these different CPACs, doctors, nurses, specialists. We have some teachers that actually are stepping up and being our clients' guardians in the future. They attend annual meetings to talk about what's been going on. So really identifying who in your life could fill some type of role. This could even be a role of taking your child out once a quarter. Maybe it's even once a year, but just building those relationships, again, really do help with creating that great life for your child, having more checks and balances. Well, they went out with them, and you know what? They really were upset. Something happened that day at the day program, or something happened that day at work or at their residence that just didn't seem right to that person that has known him all of his life. Well, then they can talk to the sibling or talk to the professional guardian or professional trustee and say, we need to make some changes here. So again, the more people that you have in the person's life, the better. And there's different natural supports in the community. I remember my brother was attending a day program in Charlestown, and one of my girlfriends was working in Charlestown. She would send me pictures all the time because he was taking dog walks, like doing dog walks around the neighborhood. Like, I saw your brother today again. So it's nice to just have more eyes, right? So if you're doing regular things, there's this thing called like a community map, maybe going a little bit on a sidetrack, but a community map where you can kind of develop different places. What does your son or daughter like to do? Like, there's a public garden. Well, I lived in East Boston for a while, and when this person was not going to the public garden, there was a very active community group saying, where is he? Nobody has seen him in months. Something must be wrong. And it was wonderful to see. This was a homeless gentleman. How many individuals really truly cared and were worried about him and trying to figure out what was going on. So, if you can kind of be a little bit of a regular, it doesn't mean going to the coffee shop or spending money being a consumer, but instead being a contributor to the community, maybe volunteering for something. Again, just kind of having more eyes, being a little bit creative. And a great place to identify different people is if you were to consider having a person-centered plan, which is something they have a facilitator come in and talk about, well, what would the person like to do in the future? Where do they want to live? And then really, which I've talked about a few times, no one can replace a parent. It does truly take that team to carry on. So thinking of your everyday, talking with your doctor, who's going to do that with your son or daughter? Who's going to talk to the doctor? Who's going to be the advocate? My mom makes great snacks. My brother works with us, and he came in today and he had this broccoli salad. I was like, oh my gosh, who made you that? Who's going to be the person that's going to be that personal chef? Who's going to be the person doing the transportation? And again, it doesn't need to be the same individual, but it's identifying this. And that's why the letter of intent is very helpful, because you can document, well, what does a typical day look like? And maybe I can start at some point, you're probably all very young now, but maybe at some point I can offload one or two of these things. Or just let somebody know that these are the things that I do, so that when I'm not here, these are things that would need to be replaced. And this is why every team to carry on is so very different. Again, kind of just like the financial planning is so different for each family. So who is on your team, right? And like we talked about, it's often a combination of family members, friends, and professionals. And we have some families that come to us and say, we don't have one person that we feel comfortable asking, or they have asked and someone has said, no, I can't do that. They may see all that a parent does and just not feel comfortable stepping in. So there are a lot of wonderful, wonderful professionals that are out there that can take on some of those formal roles. And then maybe you can have some informal, neighbors or someone else, again, in the CPAC that may just be able to oversee, or again, really thinking of the once a year check-in, how are things going? So it can be very unique to that. So this is kind of what we talked a lot about, you know, the siblings or no siblings, having the conversation, and that it's okay. You know, we had a family who was in their 90s, and the brother all of a sudden decided that he didn't want to have a role anymore in the team to carry on after the dad made several gifts over his lifetime to this individual. Well, at that point, there was one brother that wasn't in the same state, but we found a professional guardian, and that person stepped in. We also have a professional trustee, and the brother's okay from a distance. They hire a social worker to check in every once in a while on the house, make sure things are going okay. And the plan is up and running, and everyone's happy. And the brother's able to not be involved at all. And one brother, and it's okay. The other brother is, but again, if he wasn't, there is other professionals that are really doing the day-to-day items as well. So this is a really big, the formal and informal roles. So when you think of the type of, and then we call them formal because those are the ones that typically there's some type of document or contract or trust document or court document appointing them. So one is the guardian and alternatives. So one idea is that you may consider when you get older, or even at a younger point, if your sibling or someone else that you'd want to step in as co-guardian or guardian in the future is willing and able, you could actually go for co-guardianship. So you could be a guardian along with someone else too, so that when you pass away, that person would automatically be the sole guardian, and they wouldn't have to go through that court process again. So that's one thing that can be helpful. There's temporary guardianship too. So if something were to happen and the person does need immediate guardianship, there are ways for the person to get that. It can be a little bit delayed, and it is again court involved. So sometimes doing the co-guardianship later in life makes it a lot easier. If they don't need guardianship, you have that power of attorney document and that healthcare proxy document that they sign, and you could name successors to you. So it automatically be able to just change to that person. The trustee that's in the trust document, I could have almost an entire presentation on the role of trustee. There's multiple different types. There's corporate, there are professional, and there are personal. So corporate is what it sounds like. It's like a big bank, financial institution. Professional is more often an individual, maybe they work at a law firm. And then personal, same thing, just like it sounds, is an individual that likely doesn't do this professionally, but instead maybe as a sibling or a friend or someone that, again, this maybe is only a couple cases, or they only do this one situation. The informal roles, a little bit more of the fun stuff sometimes, you know, and also the ones that maybe they're good for several years. Maybe there's a social worker that really helps with occupational therapy until your son or daughter, or maybe occupational therapist rather, that can help them figure out their job situation, get them the skills that they need, and then maybe you need another type of therapist or another type of social worker. So kind of identifying what the needs of the individual are, and then matching them with other type of informal roles that can come and go or change over time. Care managers can be helpful to help pull everything together. Companions, coaches. So we found someone for my brother to be a job coach recently. I have an amazing agency that I found I was at a Lexington resource fair not too long ago. This group called BILT, B-I-L-T. They help families find, oh, Pam, do you know her? Christina?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So yeah, so
Cotting parents have made use of their services as well.
yay. So it is the people. That's oftentimes what I hear is the hardest part, the hardest piece of all of this are the people. So the good thing is I can see there are more organizations that are out there that are really good at kind of finding people, keeping people, and you know, this can be a very long-term friendship over. And then, you know, setting them up to succeed. So I did talk a little bit about, well, maybe there are situations where maybe the person said, well, I can't do that. So how do you set them up to be successful? So that is talking to them about the expectations. They may think if you say, can you be my child's guardian, that may mean them moving in to their house. Because that's what we think of, right? When somebody asks us when we're young and they have young kids, that taking over as guardianship means that we would be them moving in with us. Whereas when an individual with special needs, oftentimes that's just oversight, making sure that their care plan is completed, that they are tenanted, that they're living somewhere that is safe and that they're thriving. So kind of talking to them about that you're setting up this plan, they're going to live somewhere one day. That's kind of going back to our housing presentation, talking a little bit more about that, but then showing them how you plan to support them. So maybe there's a passing of the baton over several years. Maybe we talk on a quarterly basis. Maybe we talk on a monthly basis. Maybe we talk on an annual basis. It really depends on, again, kind of where you are in your life. Then introduce your members to your team to each other. Really important. You don't want to have a guardian and a trustee that don't talk to one another, don't know each other, because they're going to be likely working together. The guardian is on the individual, the trustee is often the one making distributions from the trust to the person. You want to make sure that they're open and willing and able to talk. And then getting back to that letter of intent, very, very important to have that letter of intent. So I think probably from the last presentation, maybe I shared the letter of intent too, because I think I always do. Maybe it's the housing checklist, but I'll make sure that that's shared with Pam, and then everyone can download that.
Yeah, what's helpful about it is it's structured. So it's like answering a series of questions, because it can feel overwhelming to sit down and list all of the things that I want people to be able to know about my child. So, and we've had times in the past where parents who want to work on a letter of intent get together with each other and kind of support each other through it. So those are all possible things too.
I think having the template for the letter is really helpful too, because it can kind of take a little bit of the stress and anxiety away from completing it yourself. So if you have an example, it can be really helpful.
Definitely. So I'll send it out to everyone. And then we also started this kind of like parent's guide to completing the letter of intent, to try to help to give a couple of tips when completing, because it can be very overwhelming. So sometimes you're saying, well, tonight or this month, I'm gonna do 5 pages and then another 5 pages. Because, you know, sometimes it can be,
or 1 page.
Or 1 page. Yeah, anything that you can do, right? So really try to avoid conflicts of interest. You want to make sure that there are different people involved. You don't want one person potentially doing it all for a couple of reasons. 1, they may just get burnt out doing everything themselves. 2 is it's nice to have someone else to talk to, right? Well, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And 3, just in case that person, something happens later in their life, they're not able to do that role, or things get a little bit astray. We've had even professional trustees that make that we've seen have made very poor investment decisions, but when they served as co-trustee, they didn't make these very drastic investment decisions that would have, you know, really didn't follow their fiduciary duties. So important, again, I think, to kind of have checks and balances. I think that it makes sense in almost everything that we do, that there's some bits of checks and balance, but here especially. And sometimes that friends and community don't have to be those formal roles, but having them maybe a trust protector as a role, that they can be the ones overseeing the trust, but don't have to have the trust duties. Trust protector is technically not a legal term, but you can put it into a legal document and have a definition for what a trust protector means to your trust. So it's not as formal as a trustee, but again, you can give them very big powers. So a letter of intent, it's not a legal binding document, something to be very aware of, but it's a fillable document that we have that we can share with you all. And it just takes your time. So we think that it's something that you all should do. And then by completing that, by sharing the story, starting to think about building the team to carry on, that can really relieve some of the different stress and uncertainty and fear by writing this down and just knowing I'm doing something to bring me closer to these different goals. And here's just a quick summary of the different sections of the letter of intent: the vision, the personal information, medical information, the fun stuff, personal care, habits and hygiene. I'm going to read all of these. You can read them, but it does give you a very robust kind of summary of your son or daughter. So this is all that I really had for the formal presentation. I'd love to have a little bit more conversation and stories that we could, maybe for other families or questions that folks have, and we could talk about maybe a situation or two.
Well, I'm sure there are some questions. I also want to ask you, Emily, if you would share a little bit of what sort of your role is in all of this process, and sort of what you can share about your personal experience with the folks here. And then let's open it up for questions for everyone.
Yeah, so I am my brother's legal guardian. Very long process, which I will talk about in a second. But I am his legal guardian, power of attorney, all that. I am trustee of his special needs trust, but there is a co-trustee as well that was court appointed. So a lot of what Alex was saying in the beginning is really important, because there is a difference between that first and third party special needs trust, and it becomes much more convoluted when it's court appointed. So really good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Troutman, and I am honored and humbled to be sitting here with you all tonight. I feel like I should apologize in advance. This is my first time sharing my story publicly. And it's not just my story. This is also the story of my brother, David. He is not able to speak or advocate for himself, and so I hope I can make him proud and do him justice tonight. I would definitely be lying if I said I wasn't nervous or emotional, and I think a lot of that will be noticeable at times. I'm here because I want to take this tragedy and turn it into something meaningful. I believe almost everyone here are parents of special needs individuals, possibly some siblings as well. But for those of you that identify with either of those two things, I understand the crippling anxiety that surrounds you every single day. If you remember one thing tonight, please let it be that. I hear you, I see you, and I'm here for anyone that would like to reach out afterwards. The stress and anxiety that comes from just the thought of making plans for once you're gone can be so overwhelming that the phrase, frozen in time doesn't even come close to accurately describing how you feel. I think Alex referred to it as paralyzing earlier, which is spot on. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that as well. Sometimes, and that's extremely common. It's very, very common to have avoidance with this topic because it is so overwhelming and stressful, and no one can take your place. And, sometimes we all just need a little help, even just to take that one step in the process. No one can do what you do. No one can live in your world. No one can walk in your shoes. But I'm here to at least be that support and take that first step with anyone that needs it. I am the oldest of two children. My brother David is 3.5 years younger than me. We were very, very close growing up. I think most siblings of special needs children will tell you we are a little protective of our siblings. I know Alex will attribute to that as well. It's basically like our constant mission to make sure that they are safe and taken care of. I actually never noticed until I was in my 30s that in all of me and David's childhood photos, I always have at least one of my arms around or on him, holding him, protecting him, literally every single photo. David was diagnosed with autism around age 5 or 6. We're talking about the early 90s here, so 30 some odd years ago, where autism wasn't well known or properly diagnosed the way it is now. Both my parents were partners at an insurance firm in downtown Boston, but as soon as David was diagnosed, our mom retired so that she could stay home and take care of him. From there, things happened kind of one after another, and my parents' marriage eventually fell apart. My dad moved out when I was 9, David was 6. There was no abuse or anything like that. They just didn't get along anymore. They couldn't stand each other. It was like oil and water. If one thing I wish had been different, it would have been that. I really wish that they had leaned on and supported each other. I think it's possible that different decisions could have and would have been made if that were the case. A few years later, my mom was unfortunately diagnosed with breast cancer. She endured a lot of treatment full of chemotherapy and radiation, but she eventually made it through. She beat it, but at a price. The chemo drug she was on had a potential long-term side effect of heart problems, and I never really worried about it. My mom was literally the epitome of health. She weighed 120 pounds, worked out multiple times a week, and after she retired, she taught aerobics classes while David and I were in school. But chemo doesn't care or discriminate. She came out of it cancer-free, but with congestive heart failure. It was a difficult condition to manage, even with treatment and medication. 4 years after that, my father passed away very suddenly, making it just the three of us, leaving it all up to my mom to put the plans in place. I tried my best to get her to do some of the things that I thought she needed to do or should do, but I think all of that weight was just too much for her to carry. She would lash out, make both of us anxious, feel guilty, and she just couldn't bring herself to do it. In 2019, the nightmare I was always afraid of that I'd had since I was a little girl came true. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer for a second time in July of that year. This time, her heart couldn't handle it. It was too damaged. The chemo drug, though it was different from the first, damaged her already weak heart even more. On December 14th, 2019, I drove to my childhood home where she and David still lived to surprise them by putting up their Christmas tree. It was something I did for them every year. When I got there, I found my mom on the couch and she was ice cold. I know now that she had been gone for about 4 hours, but I'll never get that image out of my mind. What was worse was that I found David alone and crying at the other end of the house. He told me in his own David way that he had actually been in the room when it happened, and both of our lives changed forever that day. There was no will, there were no named beneficiaries, no transfers upon deaths or TODs. It was a mess. The hell that ensued after that was worse than I or my parents could have ever imagined. Like Alex touched on earlier, so many lawyers and court-appointed personnel had to get involved. I honestly lost count because David obviously cannot speak on his own behalf. It is so, so important to make sure you have that legal guardianship in place. When your loved one becomes 18, you will want to get that legal guardianship document. And like Alex had mentioned a few minutes ago, it's really, really important that there are two, that there's a, guardian and a co-guardian. If one of those people passes away, it's imperative that it gets updated. After my father passed away, it was supposed to be me that was listed as the co-guardian, but it never happened. I had to go to court to get guardianship of my own brother after the fact. Financially, from a financial standpoint, all of my mom's assets went to probate, and a guardian ad litem, or a GAL, which is a court-appointed lawyer usually, had to be assigned to speak and advocate on David's behalf. I obviously had a conflict of interest as one of the inheritors. It took forever and it was expensive. I can't tell you how many checks I have written to lawyers in the last couple of years. It took a long year and 10 months for the estate to finally close, but it honestly felt like an eternity. In the end, I inherited 50% and David inherited 50%. The problem is when a special needs individual inherits money like that, it becomes very complicated, to put it lightly. It affects their Social Security, their disability, their day programs, their health insurance, their Medicaid, their state benefits, everything that Alex has been touching on all night. In my case, a special needs irrevocable trust had to be opened. And the saddest part is that at the end of David's life, I will actually get a bill from the state of Massachusetts of how much money was spent on him in his lifetime. I will either owe that money back or whatever is left in his trust at the time. So I have a constant juggle of all the outcomes. You want to make sure that you can spend as much of it in their lifetime while also making sure that you have enough to last their lifetime. To me, that is something no person should ever have to do. From there, a court-appointed attorney, a stranger, becomes a co-trustee to oversee that money. And I have to notify this person anytime I want to make purchases for David or take him on vacation. The list goes on, and I don't want to instill fear in anyone here tonight. The truth is, all the legal and state responsibilities are literally a second job. I have a demanding career as well, and I think today is the first time, maybe ever, that I haven't said, "Hi, my name is Emily Troutman, and this is what I do for work." I often worry that the two are just too much. I feel like I can't be the best sister in the world and also have this demanding career. I have seriously contemplated stepping away from my professional life so that I can focus all my time and efforts on David as well as myself. He has always been the most important part of my life, and he always will be. And as awful as this situation is, truly, I don't wish it on my worst enemy. I would rise up and do it 1,000 times again if I had to for him. I feel like I have spoken maybe a little too long at this point and have taken up a lot of everyone's time. I know it's getting late, but if there's one thing I hope you can all take away from this, if you can do one thing, make sure that you have a will and the legal guardianship paperwork in place. Decide the person or persons you want to inherit your assets and who you want to take care of that loved one. Do as much as you can now while you're here, because it's 1,000 times harder once you're gone. A lot has changed for David and me since 2019, and I'm not talking about a pandemic. It's been a long and exhausting road full of constant legal hurdles and battles. And honestly, I wish more than anything that I could have used those efforts to instead grieve the loss of my mom. It'll be 3 years this Christmas, and I still have not fully had a chance to do that. If there's anyone here that would like to talk, would like to learn more, to get advice from me, either Alex or myself, I'm sure would be happy to share my contact info with you at the end of this session. I urge you to reach out. Please reach out if you feel overwhelmed or lost. I want to be a resource for everyone to do anything I can to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. Thank you, everybody, so much for this opportunity, for listening, and for giving me this space to share my story as well as David's.
Yes. Oh, Emily, thank you so much for sharing that. You bring a sense of reality and the importance of thinking about these hard things, even though they're very hard. Your dedication and your love for your brother comes through so strongly. You certainly have our empathy and support for all that you've been through. And in fact, we do have a hand up. So I'm going to ask you, Michelle, to ask your question.
Yeah, so I would like to know, first of all, thank you for sharing so much. I'm in a very similar situation with my own daughter that I have to worry about. So I'd like to just know a little bit more about the guardianship, and if anybody can just explain exactly what does that mean? Because some of my friends who have done this said, "Oh, I'm only going to do it at a certain level." I don't quite even know. I'm right at the beginning of this. So if anybody has a definition or can explain that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can give you a quick overview of that, and I put it in the chat too. Any Cotting folks can feel free to contact me with questions. And Emily, please jump in terms of what your experience was. Sounds like it was a tough one to kind of be thrust into all of this. But the guardianship statute, first of all, if a young adult turns 18, they are assumed to be their own guardian. Parents are their children's guardians up until 18, and then it's assumed that everybody will become their own guardian. But for individuals with special needs or cognitive disabilities especially, they may need some help and support and some protection in terms of making decisions for themselves. The guardianship statute, as it's written, it used to be you had full guardianship or no guardianship, but now there's a lot of I think, important concern about not depriving individuals with disabilities of their rights to make decisions. So when you go through the guardianship process, you really need to look carefully at the kinds of decision making that the young person can carry out and the kinds of decisions that they may need help with. For example, making big medical decisions for many young people is something that they might kind of flounder with if left to make those decisions alone. And for many parents, they're including their child who has a disability in the decision making, even when they're making the decision. So, you know, in very few cases does a guardian become a full guardian. There's usually always some things that the individual retains as being able to make decisions for themselves. So it's often, sometimes people call it a partial guardianship, but when the paperwork is done for guardianship, the folks who help make that decision, they're called the folks who fill out the clinical team report for a person with an intellectual disability, have to specify the areas in which the individual continues to need help and support and someone else to help them make those decisions. Happy to go into that in more detail. Emily, did this question of full or partial guardianship come up in your process of seeking guardianship of your brother?
No, not at all. I know that my parents or my mom wanted me to be the sole guardian. We just never did that paperwork. I don't know if there are other ways to do it, but I do think the best way is to contact a lawyer and have them drum it up so that they can submit it to the court. I don't know if there are kind of like back loopholes around it, but
Yeah.
that is how I did it.
Yep, absolutely. You can always get help from an attorney and in seeking guardianship. There are also folks experienced in the guardianship process who can help guide you through it. It is quite possible to fill out the guardianship forms and to bring them to court yourself. But to protect the rights of individuals, there needs to be what's called, for people with intellectual disabilities anyway, a clinical team of a psychologist, a physician, and a social worker who meet with the individual and sort of are independent eyes to make sure that the individual is getting the support that they need, but not being restricted in any way.
Right. So it's really important to look at the alternatives first.
Yes.
Like if the individual could sign a power of attorney and healthcare proxy, it doesn't mean that they would understand everything about medical decisions, but instead they would understand, I'm signing this so that mom or dad can help me, or my friend or whomever they'd want to appoint.
That's correct.
And that is not court involved, which is really nice, versus where guardianship, like both Pam and Emily have mentioned, is a court process that does often take time because you have to share with people that you are going for guardianship. So if anybody wants to contest it, there's a very specific process. So the Massachusetts Guardianship Association is another wonderful place for information. The MGA, they have different presentations and talks, and there's a list of professionals on there that, you know, whether it's a social worker that could help with the clinical team report, that type of thing. So it's.
Yes, I agree, Alex. It's really important to sort of go into it with an open mind and to see what supports fit best for your child and your family. So are there other questions about anything we've talked about tonight?
If I could just ask just one other question in the same thing. Are you going to have any of these workshops on just guardianship? Because it sounds like there's a whole lot of information. I'm just curious where I can get help with all of this.
Absolutely. We will have more. We typically do have presentations on guardianship, and we will have more in the future. But in the meantime, I have lots of information that I can share with you about it. We should make a time to connect, and I can give you that information.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. Thank you both, or all, I should say. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Emily, so much. It was really nice to hear your full story. Thank you. That was really nicely,
Yeah.
presented to all of us. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, yes. And Emily, why don't you put your contact information in the chat? And
Okay.
I know I have your email address, so if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I can direct them to you as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. I think that, yes, Rebecca, sure.
I was just, first of all, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think that is a story that every parent should hear, because I mean, once you hear that, it's very motivating to get all of these documents in order, and your brother is so incredibly lucky to have you. And I just, having had a little bit of interface in getting guardianship for my daughter with the court, it is, I can only imagine when, I mean, we had a fairly straightforward process, but I can only imagine what it's like if you don't. And I was thinking, well, a couple of things. One is, we had, just by chance, we had, when I went to get the papers to go for guardianship in Middlesex Court, they do have pro bono attorneys there that will help you go through the process. And I highly recommend that. We had
I also did it in Middlesex Court.
Yeah. And the attorney that happened to be there that day was invaluable in helping us walk through the process. So I'm pretty sure that's still a resource that's available. And I think they post the days when they're there, and literally you just show up and you meet somebody. And then these very kind-hearted, giving people, I think a lot of them are retired attorneys. They literally go to court with you. They come to your hearing, they file your papers. And
Yep.
The other thing is I think when we did it, I'm pretty sure I have to read the document, but we put myself, my husband, and my son on, so as guardians. So in theory, he's all set when we are no longer here. And then the other thing I wanted to say, and this was not pre-planned, but we met Alex years ago at a similar cutting event in person, not on Zoom. But it is invaluable to have a person in place when things happen. Like, my aunt died unexpectedly and did have her will go to her 8 nieces and nephews, and there wasn't any vehicle set up. And so we did have to do this special kind of trust, but having a professional to work with is really has been super helpful. And then the final thing I wanted to say is, after hearing Emily's story, I know how Cotting's working on a transition curriculum. I think Emily's story should be part of that transition curriculum.
That's a great recommendation. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
because
right.
it was, I'm so glad it's recorded, and it was so eloquent and heartfelt. And I just think would be a great experience for parents, because it is overwhelming getting it all done.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's perfect.
Mhm.
And I know, no parent ever wants their typically developed children to inherit this. And that was my motivation for sharing my story, is that hopefully, the parents that are out there don't want that to happen,
And I got that completely from what you said, because that is, especially when there's one sibling, it does feel like it's a overwhelming responsibility that you're passing on.
Yeah, and our parents were young. They were in their 60s, and we're both in our 30s now, so it was young.
Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
think it is such a wonderful reminder too of how important that circle of support is, and to have, as many varied members in that team to carry on. I think that's one of the things that when you're plunged into this suddenly, and there's not a team, there's not that sort of circle of support there. So that's, I think, another good reason to think about, who are your fellow travelers, and who might who might be part of your child's life into the future as well. I also want to thank Stacy for putting in the chat that the Lurie Center also has monthly trainings on guardianship, and you can find links to those in the Cotting Weekly Update if you're a Cotting parent. And also you can see the chat as well. Emily, many thanks to you for sharing your story. Well,
Thank you so much.
You are so, we're so pleased to have had you, and so pleased to have had 3 opportunities to benefit from your knowledge and wisdom and your experience, Alex. Thank you for helping us navigate this year of parent anxieties together. Thank you to all the parents who gather and our fellow travelers for each other in this process. And we'll continue to try to do that for each other into the future. So I appreciate your being here. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Alex, to Emily, to myself with any questions or further ideas. And with that,
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Have a great night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Emily. Take good care.
You
Great
too.
to
Bye,
meet
Pam.
you. Stay in touch.
Yeah, you too.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.